I went from silver to masters playing solo queue tank, mostly without voice comms, and only with 150 hours in all modes on my most played hero. Achieving masters marks the fulfillment of one of my longtime goals, so I want to share with you my story. These are the concrete details on my improvement process, and I hope my struggles can help energize your own growth. May 28th, 2017. A friend told me about an Overwatch free weekend during the free anniversary. My siblings and I had never touched a first person shooter game before, but we began playing on our lower end gaming laptop, and so my fateful journey began. Early on, I watched a ton of educational content and focused on playing lots of quick play. I worked on almost any and every hero to try and bring them up to a quote unquote usable level of skill. And then I would take notes at the end of each day and compare how competent I felt playing my favorite heroes. I only did that for about a month. But I think that observing your play as a beginner can have very good positive impacts on your play. Bottom line is when you're a beginner, you just need to play more. I didn't play nearly enough, and I think that it slowed me down a bit. But it's very important to just get some reps in, get some hours, and that will set up the foundation for you to become a much better player down the line. So, of course, I placed quite badly. I placed at 2000 on the line, which is fine, but then of course I fell into 1700 or so SR in the next couple seasons, which you'll see in a moment. And it wasn't the brightest time, but obviously when you're new, it's pretty easy to stay positive about it. But I did eventually just turn to being a quick play warrior instead of focusing on competitive because it was just a little too intimidating for my personal state right then. Fast forward to season 18. I've been basically only doing the placements every season and just grinding quick play for the past, 13 seasons. And now I am entering role queue. Woo! So role queue is this new environment. Now I can focus on tanks, DPS, or support. And in comes a slew of issues as I try and figure out what I want to focus on because I actually enjoyed playing a mix of the heroes. And while I embraced having role queue and it rejoiced because it fixed my issue of being stuck with five DPS players, um, it also was the start of me trying to figure out a lot of very confusing things about the game. The bottom line being trying to figure out which heroes I wanted to focus on, which roles, and early on, I just played a lot of Zarya, but as time went on, I branched out more and more, and it took some time before my hero pool started to stabilize again. I placed slightly under 2,500 on tank, and soon crossed into platinum for the first time. This was followed by a dramatic climb up to 2018, which would remain my peak for multiple seasons. One gameplay aspect that helped me improve was focusing on Zarya's cycles between aggressive play and passive play. But truthfully, I don't remember all the details on my improvement here because it was my first semester in college and it was a very difficult time for me. Another thing to note here is that I actually placed in 1700 on support, and I want to highlight this because I actually climbed very, very rapidly on support from 1700 to low to mid plat in the span of 2 seasons. And really, the one thing that took me to that much improvement was just focusing on my positioning and safety. I was always looking to play corners, play safe, and stay alive as Ana. And I almost exclusively focused on Ana with like a little bit of some other heroes like Brigitte and Bap. And that revolutionized my support play. And while maybe you'll need higher standards in Overwatch 2 with an improved player base or something, I think for the most part, if you're at a low rank, it just does wonders to focus on survival because that's like the good foundation that sets you up for improving and learning those more aggro plays later on. Seasons 20 through 22 were marked by dissatisfaction with very little progress. I rediscovered my early game love for playing Tracer, who has risen to be my most played DPS hero, and I participated in a community tournament called the Scrub Cup, playing DPS. I felt crushed by my inability to reach 2800 SR again on tank for several months, and straight up wrote in my journal that I felt I was better than a plat tank and deserved high plat or diamond. Of course, this was when I was in like low plat to high gold range. I wanted to be one of the best players in a role, become a pro player, or become a coach, but I felt that there was no way I could commit to any of those dreams. Hell, I was a gold and plat player. No one would take it seriously. It's just the truth. I would have had to take the most blind and foolhardy leap of faith in existence. So eventually, I tempered back my expectations towards reaching diamond first and doing some coaching. You got to take things one step at a time. I mention this stage of my journey because I want you to understand that it's completely normal to feel out of your depth or like you can't catch up with your goals. It's important to just be realistic with it and take your goals one step at a time. Just take a deep breath and focus on your improvement today, tomorrow, just in the now, instead of obsessing over who you've been, who you want to be, and all that. Now, let me talk about some of the actions that I tried to improve around this time. I watched videos, I tuned into Twitch streams, I read online guides, and I watched Overwatch League content. I also started doing VOD reviews for the first time in the Overwatch University subreddit and set up a quote unquote hero menu where I would restrict myself to focusing only on a handful of selected heroes. In dead honesty, none of it was really valuable to me as a player, and I don't think much of it helped me grow. Educational content helped me understand the game better in theory, but there's just so much of it and from not high enough quality sources, so I never understood how I could apply it into my own play, all the concepts that they talked about. So it helped me like understand the game better in theory, just not in practice. Twitch streamers in Overwatch League are phenomenal entertainment, and I still enjoy them now. But unless you understand the game well enough to understand why they're doing certain plays, it will be pretty useless. My hero menu, or like hero pools basically, would have worked had I actually managed to stick to it. I was pretty bad at actually sticking to the group of heroes. I tried to rush too much with focusing on heroes. And honestly, I don't think you need to focus on a selected pool of heroes really until you're in plat and trying to get to diamond. That's when maybe you need to start to focus in a lot more. So the only improvement step that I can recommend is potentially giving VOD reviews to other players because it can help you build up a game understanding and think critically about a variety of situations without your own ego getting in the way. Because when you're doing self-reviewing, it's really easy to be blinded by your own justifications. But a lot of times you can actually review other people and get the thoughts pumping that you can apply into your own play without kind of self-attacking yourself, if that makes sense. So all of these mentioned actions did help me understand the game better, but it just didn't level up my abilities as a player specifically in any dramatic fashion. In season 23, I finally found the next big catalyst for my improvement, and this was joining a scrim team. I tried out and joined a 2.6 to 3K scrim team as a flex tank player. I was picked up to be the backup who could play both main tanks and off tanks for the team, the third tank player. Fortunately, I'd grappled up to 2600 SR, so I barely met the requirements. And less than a month after joining that scrim team for the first time, I hit my new career high and peaked at 2965. It's all thanks, honestly, to putting myself outside of my comfort zone. Because at first I felt wildly out of my depth, but as a result of that, I learned quickly because I wanted to catch up. I was like trying to absorb all the information I could about these players who were like a 200 or so SR above me and like stable plat players and stuff. And it got me a lot more in tune with my shot calling skills too, which I didn't use later on, but they helped me quite a bit at the time for getting solidly into plat. Soon after this, I created my other two accounts, Parasol and Casil, both of which were originally high platinum after I placed them and then eventually moved into diamond. Uh, my team environment promoted a lot of improvement for me, and this was only compounded by around here was when I also started frequenting Coach Spilo's community, and he was obviously a very reputable information source. And I would encourage you as well to consider joining a team if you haven't and really want to improve, as well as looking to join the communities of coaches and engage with their content. I had become team captain eventually, but around season 25, I left the team to focus on academics. I had climbed to only one game away from Masters on my Casil account, which you can see on my profiles here, but I fell short and I descended somewhat downwards after that. Basically, the work that I had put in with my team, combined with frequently playing during winter break, helped me reach that new peak. Bottom line is you just have to play a lot, get in those reps. But unfortunately, as I lost time to play Overwatch and focused on my academics, I did lose my touch as well with my play. So I began coaching in March, and that was honestly the final nail in the coffin because I basically just had no time anymore to practice Overwatch. I was mostly watching scrims, doing coaching, etc. So I hung pretty stably in plat on my various accounts and like kind of on the verge of diamond or low diamond on my two newer accounts. But if you think that you might want to become a coach, I would tell you to give it a shot. Nothing gives coaching experience better than just getting your hands dirty and giving coaching a shot. But if you primarily want to be a player, do not coach. I cannot recommend it. It's one thing to try and guide people occasionally through VOD reviews. I think that can be helpful. But if you're trying to seriously coach, you'll either be holding yourself back as a player by not dedicating enough time to your improvement, or you'll basically be doing nothing to help your team and being a mediocre coach giving them no real coaching guidance. Teams don't need a dude who's just saying focus targets better. They need someone who's actually wanting to develop themselves as a coach at the same time that these people are developing themselves as players. I coached my team until October 2021 when we eventually headed our separate ways to focus on academics with the start of the new school year. This marked season 30, I believe, when I shifted predominantly to playing on my Parasol account after falling heavily in Tank SR on my Castile account. So I spent time grinding tank and DPS, which moved me from high plat on tank into stable low diamond. And in 2 seasons, I went from 2,400 on DPS up to 3,000. The keys here being focus and time, once again, very common trends in my story. I had the game understanding from engaging in these coaching communities and content and doing VOD reviews for people, etc. And I had the positioning discipline to survive, and I knew the good off angles in theory. I just needed experience, better decisions on average, better mechanics, better adaptation. Like, people don't understand the sheer ocean of experience that can lie between uh, their current self and their goals. So by now I had played enough hours to naturally stabilize around a few core heroes on each role. So on tank I had Sig, Ball, and Winston. On DPS I had Tracer, Ashe, and Echo. And on support I had basically just Ana. So my revitalized time input from ending coaching the team, as well as focusing on these more specific hero groups and like on the same DPI and fixing stuff with that translated it into actual growth. In comes seasons 35 and 36, the graveyard of Overwatch. I realized that with the advent of Overwatch 2, I was facing my final choices to reach Masters before the game dramatically shifted. Thanks to some encouragement from one of my players, who I had coached on that team, I agreed to aim for 5 games a day while focusing heavily on Sigma specifically. My plan worked well. In the first week, I climbed from 3,200 up to 1 game away from Masters again, and I actually hit that point 2 or 3 times in the span of a day. Unfortunately, the pressure every time threw me off my game, and I would soon, in just a couple of days, be back to where I started that season. And I spent the following month wandering around aimlessly through Diamond, practicing inconsistently and not always reaching my target of 5 games per day. I'll talk about some of my play observations with specific heroes in a moment, but honestly, my real progress didn't happen until a week after the start of season 36. So there was a lot of time spent with just very little actual obvious improvement or progress. But the fact is that I was getting in those reps and I was slowly improving and gaining that experience. So I finally hit Masters in season 36, and well, I'll let you either ask in the comments or message me directly, or you can read the post in the description if you want to hear about all the mental aspects of trying to work to reach that and like some of the lessons I learned with that. Um, the biggest changes for me that took me from mid diamond up to masters was the first was self VOD reviewing. So it was very easy for me to always try and fit my my gameplay when I was looking back at it and considering how I played. I would always try and fit it into my perceptions of how I viewed the game with oh, I should be at this angle, I should be over here because I need this off angle, etc., etc. And unfortunately, the actual games are very different than what goes on in your head. So eventually, I realized I was being blinded by my preconceptions with the game. So instead, what I would do is after every game, and sometimes even after each fight, I would write down things that worked well or didn't work well for the hero that I was on, for just my overall gameplay, etc. And doing this in my journal gradually stacked up to quite a few pages over time. But importantly, it gave me a more unbiased way of just, hey, did this work? Continue. Did it not work? Cut it off. Because if you're going in expecting something to be the right way to do things, you're not going to be very easily able to grow. So this kind of more unbiased way of self-reviewing helped me more honestly improve and find some ways that I could improve my gameplay across pretty much all the tank heroes. So I have a couple of these tips that I wrote down. And I'll basically just go down the list chronologically. So on Roadhog, you want to observe your opponent carefully before using hook. You want to watch carefully for an opening and then you hit your hook during that gap. This allows you to more carefully line up the shot. And a lot of the times, if you just go for speed and like instantly throw a hook, you don't really have their movement fully captured yet, or you just might not need hook, or you just miss it because you're just being too hasty. His secondary fire is basically the same. Line up your shots carefully and actually predict where the enemies will be located. I know that you think that you're predicting, but unless you're actually putting intentionality behind it, you're probably not. So while you might feel like you're using hook and shooting far slower, and you probably are, it pays to build up the consistency first because you can always improve the speed later. When playing Wrecking Ball, when grappling, try to think about where you want to end up after your grapple or slam rather than just who you're targeting and swinging through. It's easy to tunnel vision on who you want to hit, but then you have an awkward grappling hook and hit a wall, or you slam and get triple CC'd or something and can't escape. It happened all too commonly, and while there's less CC in Overwatch 2, I'm pretty sure there will be enough to still make your life miserable if you're sloppy. So by thinking through the full movement and where you want to end up after the engage, you can do a more fluid engagement and avoid getting caught as easily. It helps make sure that you're not dying and bleeding ult charge to the enemy team, and more importantly, it ensures that you're alive for the follow-up play after your engagement. I often fed playing ball and then prayed that my team would be able to make my engagement work and like capitalize on my disruption instead of trying to live for the cleanup phase or the second engagement mid-fight. But it would have been a lot more powerful if I had just stayed alive. I could have gotten more ult charge, I could have gotten more damage, controlled the angles more, prevented them from retaking those high grounds, and so on. Yeah, try and think about where you want to end up after you go through the enemy team. On Winston, it was actually similar to Roadhog. Play patiently to engage and draw attention where your team can follow up instead of blindly choosing to go for early cleave damage. This isn't to say that early cleave damage is always bad, but a lot of the times I ended up using my shield and jump to cleave and then get out, and then I wouldn't really be able to do anything for like 13 seconds or whatever while I wait for bubble to come back. And my team wouldn't really be able to benefit from it that much because I was only thinking about how much cleave I could get rather than thinking, well, can my team capitalize on my bubble and play here? So I think that it can work well occasionally, but a lot of the times I wanted to instead try to wait and cleave for when my team could actually capitalize on it, because then my resources are getting more return for the whole squad rather than just being used for myself. When playing Zarya, you want to bubble when allies are taking aggressive positions, not just when they're taking damage. People often stabilize after taking their damage, so if you bubble them even a moment too late because you see them taking damage, they'll often already be moving out from that aggressive position. A lot of the time, also, the enemy team will just stop shooting. They'll stop damaging because the person's already low or whatever, or they ran out of ammo. So instead, watch when they're first moving into that aggressive position, and then you can look for the bubble. This isn't a bubble that you're looking for charge for, it's a playmaking bubble. So if you're looking for charge, I would recommend just using self bubbles because it's a lot more predictable. You can kind of balance it out, but honestly, also, you don't have to worry that much about pre-fight charge because you just get enough charge during the fight with both of your bubbles. So it's kind of a trap almost for Zarya players is they think it matters so much to get high charge, but then they miss out on the playmaking bubbles that help people out when they're actually trying to play aggro and like do high impact plays. When playing Rhine, do not do predictive charges into the choke point. They will cost you your life, or at least high resources like most of your HP and shield and support attention to kite back alive. And even if they charge, if even if the charge works, at best you're killing a squishy because you can't even kill a tank with it. So you're just charging in and then because it's like, ha ha ha, yeah, they're coming through here. I can predictively charge someone. But then you're just getting slammed by all the enemies. So instead, uh, let them walk into you because that way you're actually maximizing your safety and like using the map to your advantage. There's no reason to put yourself into the long sight lines of the enemy. Like just chill, let them come to you, take a deep breath. Do not try to predictively charge their front line. It goes so badly. Now, with Sigma, this is one I'm going to go a little more in depth on because obviously he's my main hero that I was playing. But I was struggling immensely to deal with dive compositions as him because he's very frail and poke heavy, And if he gets dove on, such as by a Winston and a wrecking ball, and like a tracer, he can go down fast. So the thing that I learned here is, first of all, you can save accretion and flux for catching the engage, but this won't always work because sometimes your accretion you'll miss it or whatever, or even if you deny the first dive person, other people will still dive you or something like that. And Flux can sometimes miss or just not get the value that you need. So the biggest thing for me here was learning that the more mobile team has the right to play further apart. The mobile team can take the angles initiative, while the less mobile team works to avoid these angles or hold them in check while taking smaller interior off angles against the enemy team. So let me explain this. Basically, if the enemy team has high mobility heroes like Lucio and can like quickly rush me horizontally, I need to play relatively near my team because if they rush me down and I can't get back to my team fast enough, I can't receive my team's resources. This is also the same case of if they rush my team, they can often kill my team before my team can benefit from my pressure and resources. So an off angle is phenomenal, and you should always, always, always look to have an off angle, even in the case of playing closer to your team. But only if you can afford the longer rotation time and not be split during the kite back pathing. So what I would do is I would take these small off angles where I might be able to like not be exactly stacked up on my team so that they can't like literally hit both of us with like one same Winston Tesla cannon or whatever, but where we're still close enough to help each other out and not get cut off by an engage. Similarly, if I'm playing someone like Ball or whatever against less mobile targets, or even if I'm playing Sigma against like super immobile targets, you can play way further apart and take super aggressive angles because they don't have someone who can split you off from your team in a dangerous way like this. But yeah, this spacing was super important for me on multiple heroes, especially for dealing with these really mobile comps. Another one was for Reinhardt and Sigma was that my ultimates are better used as a mid-fight tool, not as an initiation. While using an ultimate as an initiation can be good in coordinated play, even then I wouldn't always recommend it. But in unorganized play, it's usually not very good because yes, you'll force out enemy resources, but a lot of the times your team won't know how to actually follow up on that resources deficit for the enemy team. So instead of initiating with your ult, focus on setting up a good neutral pre-fight so that you can actually force the enemy's resources by your own merit instead of just trying to strong arm it. And then you can use these ults in the mid fight as a response to the enemy team using their resources. Because then when you use your flux or use your shatter or whatever, first of all, you're almost guaranteed to catch people because their positioning has devolved as the fight has progressed. And then second of all, they usually have less resources to deal with these strong ultimates, so they're more likely to actually get value and change the tide of battle. So don't use ultimates as an initiation tool on ladder, usually. Keep in mind, this is just my personal experience. Sometimes it will be good, but consider that you don't always want to initiate with an ult. And you definitely don't want to ult in the cleanup phase because you've already won the fight and don't really need that extra power. You can just let them go or whatever. So use your ultimates in the mid fight when you want to change the tide of battle and when you want to engage in brawling and like scrappier fighting. Be very intentional with this because I missed so many flexes, and that's why I was like really heavy on my mind. I was like, well, how can I actually figure out how I'm going to hit flexes, and using them more in the mid fight was my answer. Well, I have a lot of other miscellaneous tips and tricks that I wrote down about the game and heroes in general. I don't want to go too overly long with this, so I'll leave you with one more. So, part of strategy in business, Overwatch, wherever, is knowing that you cannot afford to spring for every opportunity. You have to make sure that you have the resources that you need stockpiled up, and then don't spend them on activities that don't align with your strategy. So, like for example, if I'm playing Ashe and we have a Winston, I shouldn't be using Dynamite in the pre-fight and the poke phase if I know that our Winston is likely to be going in soon. I like obviously in an uncoordinated environment, you might not know for sure, but the fact is that we are banking on this Winston and his bubble as our main strategy for the team. So I want to align my dynamite power with that and my positioning with that so that I am also looking for a single strike. Meanwhile, if I'm playing with someone like a Sigma, it doesn't make sense for me to go all in on Tracer, do a triple blink, pulse bomb, recall. If I miss the pulse bomb and then give up a key angle that we need to hold. Because here we were just trying to play a stretched out battle and play for slow map control. So this burst resources means that my team is now at a deficit for the next 12 seconds or however long it takes until I have recall back. So know that you can't go for everything. There are some opportunities you'll have to pass on because they just cost too much, and those costs don't align with what your team's improvised strategy is. And you can know this strategy, like in a coordinated play environment, you might schedule it in a VOD review or talk about it. But in ladder, you just have to watch your teammates. It's like improv. You have to just improvise as you go along, make it up, think what they're like, what your teammates are likely to do, and do your best to try and align with that. Hopefully, that gives you a couple interesting thoughts about my personal experiences with climbing in Overwatch, some useful tips here and there about the climbing process, about how much time it takes, how much I think you need to be focused and like review your own gameplay, and some concrete tips there at the end. If you enjoyed my content, please check out some of my other stuff or whatever, or keep it on hand to use it as a reference or whatever. And thank you for listening.